Webinar in the Magna Carta Observatory series, building up to the launch of the Magna Carta Universitatum 2020 on the 16th of June. My name is David Locke, and I'm the Secretary General of the Magna Carta Observatory. Each of our webinars has been produced in partnership with another leading body in the higher education sector, and today's is the first to be produced in association with one of our founding partners, the European University Association. And I would like at this point to thank my colleague, Secretary General Amanda Crowfoot, for working with me in the production and delivery of today's event. Before introducing our theme, I'd just like to introduce the webinar protocols. You should note that the webinar is being recorded so that everything that is said will be on the record. We advise you to keep your cameras off, and could you please stay muted unless we call upon you to ask your question in person. We do encourage you to put questions and put them in the chat function as soon as possible so that they stand a greater chance of being selected. The theme of our webinar today is European Universities 2030, Vision and Values. In February this year, the EUA published its report, Universities Without Walls, a Vision for 2030. The report is based on extensive consultation with individuals, experts, and stakeholder groups. In March 2020, the Magna Carta Observatory published a new Magna Carta Universitatum, the MCU 2020. This took account of changes which had taken place since the original document was prepared in 1988, and it anticipates the world that universities will face in the 2020s and beyond. This webinar considers the two documents and how universities can, in practice, balance the strategic orientation of their activities towards large-scale societal goals with academic freedom and specifically the freedom of individual researchers. To inform us today, we have the presidents of the two partnering bodies, and we have two rectors from different parts of Europe. Each will speak for 10 minutes, and then we will take questions and discussions. As you have been circulated with the CVs or biographies of the speakers, I will not take time to introduce them. So may we please go now to Professor Michael Murphy, President of EUA, who will speak under the title Universities Without Walls, Living Our Values.
Thank you very much, David. And can I thank the Observatory for organizing this event. We have been valued partners for many years, and it is great to see such a large audience for the subject. In compliance with your wishes, I will begin with a short overview of Universities Without Walls, which, as you say, resulted from a consultation with our 850 member universities, and of course, our societal stakeholders across Europe over the past year. And the first finding in our exercise was the broad consensus on the challenges that face society in Europe and the world in the coming years. Obviously, sustainability, balancing environmental, economic, and social well-being were at the fore. The threats posed by digitalization and the opportunities of new technologies and artificial intelligence featured large. Challenges arising from demographic changes in our societies and from geopolitical realignments, which are accompanied by charges of foreign interference and security threats that challenge cooperation among universities and countries. These were to the fore. And then, underpinning all, how we can protect our common values when democracy is threatened in many of our countries and when public debate is being eroded and is polarized. We formed the view that a vision of universities without walls, strong, open, and engaged institutions can live up to those challenges in the coming decades. But what do we mean by open universities in the next instance? And of course, there are many facets to that. Firstly, we see our universities in the future being very much hybrid, combining virtual education that is not place-bound with traditional campus-based learning. We see our universities being more accessible, not just to the young, which is still important in some countries, but to lifelong learners who must continually upskill. And we must include far more non-traditional and disadvantaged students, growing diversity. Our walls will be open because students and staff will be more mobile, physically and virtually, moving between institutions and countries. We will be open in that the campus and the workplace will be more connected with far more experiential learning and exchanges in education and in research. We are open to new models of learning, more flexible, more learner-orientated, co-creating knowledge. Open to evidence-based debate, because that's critical for the development of creativity, entrepreneurial spirit, critical thinking skills. Open between disciplines, more interdisciplinarity, and open in how we publish and how we share our research data. Open in that we're engaged with society, leading regional innovation in partnership with business and civic organizations. And of course, we've got to move then from that vision to a reality, and this will require energy, partnerships, regulatory frameworks, and good leadership and investment. We are diverse. That is the strength of Europe, and we still see diversity as critical to our future success. But now returning to values, which is the topic for today, center stage here, but also in our vision, the retaining of core values. Academic freedom and institutional autonomy will remain foundations for success. Freedom of thought, freedom to publish, freedom to educate, to make sure that we do support critical thinking. Ethical science, integrity, because that is necessary to grow societal trust and to combat the arguments against science and expertise. And diversity, equity, and inclusion are very important for sustainable development. Now, we have to admit that there are challenges. Academic freedom and institutional autonomy are under threat across many countries in Europe, notably Turkey and Hungary, Belarus in recent times. But we also have to work on growing or on dealing with the challenge of restricted research funding models and overzealous accountability, which are becoming a feature in many countries, and self-censorship by students or staff. There are too many breaches of academic integrity in our communities, and they feed the populist anti-intellectual narrative and science skepticism. And the COVID pandemic, of course, has exacerbated challenges through more government controls that may not be reversed, and shown up social inequalities in access to digital skills and to broadband. But at the same time, COVID has been a positive in that it has highlighted the immense contributions by universities to society. Diagnostic tests and vaccines within months, not years, and evidence to inform public policy. Now into the future, what can we do to protect our values? And our first point in our document is that we must ensure freedom for teachers and students on our own campuses, fostering free expression. We must continually reflect on our core values in every decision that we take in our institution. Not always easy, and there will be lots of contradictions, but we must continually reflect. Such things as how the strategic orientation of research towards large-scale societal goals can be squared with academic freedom. The line between preparing students for the labor market as opposed to enabling them to develop for fulfilling lives. And we have to balance openness in science and research with concerns about security, protection of values, and strategic interests. So we're working now on principles to guide our universities in making these assessments. But we will maintain vigorous scientific standards and ethical conduct, and we will have policies in our institutions to ensure integrity and to foster a culture of integrity. We will also foster respect for civic and democratic values through our practices in diversity and equity, and mirroring our values in the values we espouse in our communities. And widening access, of course, will grow understanding in society of the importance of our values and would help sustain them. Continuous dialogue with power holders will remain critical, and universities will have to be accountable to society, but only through frameworks that will be sufficient but not stifling, and we've got to negotiate them. So a lot of challenges, but confidence that we can sustain. Final comment, our values define who we are, and I'm confident that if we live them and if we champion them in society and prove their worth to society, then I think we have another 1,000 years ahead of us as an important sector in our global community. So I think Universities Without Walls should see us through the next decades. That's an overview, David, and I thank you for the opportunity to share it.
Well, I thank you for so succinctly summarizing such a comprehensive and powerful report, and for putting values at the center of that. Our second speaker is the President of the Governing Council of the Magna Carta Observatory, Dr. Seibold Norder. Seibold was the chair of the committee which drafted MCU 2020, and he is going to speak under the title Academic Freedom, Autonomy and Responsibility. None can live without the other. Seibold.
Thank you very much, David. Dear colleagues and friends in higher education, it's great to see so many familiar names and faces on the screen. It is, of course, not the real thing, but it's great anyway. We all know that ours are challenging times for university leadership and those of us who are supporting university leadership. Our mission remains crucial. The number and diversity of students seeking a university education continues to grow. Research activities have proliferated almost everywhere. the contribution of universities in the preservation of the planet, promoting health, prosperity, enlightenment around the world is as important as ever. Yet, challenges do multiply as well. Although we do not experience these challenges everywhere in the same shape and with the same force, all of us are being tested one way or another. For instance, trust in academia is being eroded by a loss of confidence in expertise. Or we are facing opposition against openness to dialogue and rejection of intolerance in places and to degrees that until recently were hard to imagine. We find political authorities in several countries very eager to rein in academic freedom and the independence of universities. Values and principles that these very same authorities ought to recognize, ought to protect by their lawmaking and policies on education and research. I won't go on describing and characterizing our situation. There is no need. You know it firsthand yourselves. I rather highlight 3 strategies or insights that, in my view, are especially called for under the circumstances. In doing so, I shall be speaking mainly about what we as universities, as university leaders and those who support them, can and should do ourselves. First of all, I suggest that those of us in positions of university leadership as rectors, vice presidents, or deans do some serious self-reflection, rethinking what kind of an institution and what kind of leadership we want to be. If facing new and formidable challenges, one should know where one stands, which values and ideals are the main drivers. It is my deep conviction that universities are not valueless provisions or selfish platforms. They're independent, not to serve themselves, but to be able to engage with and respond to the aspirations and challenges of the world and to the communities they serve, to benefit humanity and contribute to sustainability. Academic freedom, autonomy, and responsibility, none can live without the other. Secondly, and this is already a more difficult task, it is not sufficient that leadership thinks and talks about the principles, values, and responsibilities. This should be a living issue in and of the entire academic community. I said, this is already more difficult. I said this because in most places, we are used to only talk values and principles in solemn declarations. I said this because in many places, universities have become platforms for very individual careers and individual interests, rather than communities with shared ideals and shared convictions. Yet, if universities are to hold their own, they must be living the values they profess to be holding as a community. As the Magna Carta Observatory, whose current council chair I happen to be, we have some years ago launched the Living Values Project, which is typically trying to accomplish exactly this. And meanwhile, those universities that have joined the project and practiced it have indeed discovered that it can be done, and that indeed is a promising path to establishing or reinforcing the academic community as a shared valued community. To avoid possible misunderstanding, such a shared values community is not a community where all academics and students think alike and hold the very same convictions. As they create and disseminate knowledge, universities question dogmas and establish doctrines, and encourage critical thinking in all students and scholars. Academic freedom is their lifeblood, open inquiry and dialogue, their nourishment. It is such values and principles that academic communities should hold dear and live by. Thirdly, and lastly, individual universities are not stand-alone institutions. We are interconnected nationally and internationally in very many ways. In 1988, 33 years ago, hundreds of European university rectors came to Bologna, Italy to sign the Magna Carta Universitatem. Then, after a decade of budget and policy pressures, a new age dawned. Europe was about to open its internal borders, and universities were very keen to intensify their international collaborations. Under these circumstances, they made a strong statement that the fundamental values, the fundamental need for independence, openness, and tolerance, alongside a strongly felt commitment to play their part in an increasingly international setting, was the conviction of these university leaders. They said, in short, academic freedom, autonomy, and responsibility, none of these can or should come without the other. Since then, this community of signatories has grown in size and space to almost 1,000 universities beyond Europe, worldwide. Now, on the basis of many meetings and consultations, we have found that it is time to repeat and expand the 1988 statement. The new Magna Carta Universitatem 2020 would have been launched last September had the pandemic restrictions not prevented this. We will now do this June in a remote meeting to which all of you are most welcome. The main message of this new declaration is a restatement of academic freedom and autonomy as fundamental values and principles, and their crucial combination with the responsibilities universities have to respond to the communities they serve. I give two quotations to illustrate the type of statements this Magna Carta Universitatem 2020 contains. Universities acknowledge that they have a responsibility to engage with and respond to the aspirations and challenges of the world and to the communities they serve to benefit humanity and contribute to sustainability. And second, intellectual and moral autonomy is the hallmark of any university and a precondition for the fulfillment of its responsibilities to society. That independence needs to be recognized and protected by governments and by society at large, and defended vigorously by institutions themselves. In your materials, you've found a link to the full statements, so no need to quote any further. The value of this statement, this new declaration, as I see it, is on the one hand in its reiteration of the essential characteristics of what a responsible university is. And on the other hand, in the very act of signing such a declaration alongside hundreds of colleagues worldwide. It is absolutely crucial, above all in critical times, that we as responsible universities stand united, make our voices heard in harmony, and support and stand by colleagues who find themselves under particularly severe pressures. One final sentence. As chair of the Magna Carta Observatory, I am very pleased that we are doing this webinar jointly with the European University Association, as they are exactly the kind of international association for impact, support, and mutual help that all of us badly need. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Seibold. And we hear very clearly from what you say that values are to be lived, and to explore how they are being lived in two situations, we now welcome two rectors. The first is Professor Marcin Palis, formerly rector of the University of Warsaw, and recently a member of the MCO Council. Marcin is going to speak under the title, Bringing Together Academic Freedom, Institutional Autonomy, and the Public Role of Universities, Observations from Poland. Marcin.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, in Magna Carta Universitatum 2020 and in UA Vision Universities 2030, the public role and importance of universities is clearly set out. The Magna Carta emphasizes the indispensable intellectual independence of researchers and teachers, and the independence of universities both as institutions and as communities. UA, in its vision, calls universities honest knowledge brokers to stress that universities serve the society at large and are public goods, but without becoming instrumental for any particular group, political party or power, business or confession. To effectively serve the broad public and to fulfill the public roles, universities and academics needs to be trusted. We heard already about this. Trust is an essential factor for universities to fulfill their role. This trust is not given once and forever. It has to be continuously built and cared for. The general conviction that universities are needed by societies and that they can be trusted is essential when political or other external powers want to tinker at the autonomy or academic freedom. In some countries they do. It can take place explicitly through changes to the legislation, but it can also happen through limiting the practical enforceability of existing laws that protect the freedom. To successfully resist such threats, universities need broad support from the society. Seibold Norda pointed out that academic freedom, university autonomy, and other rights can't be interpreted separately and disconnected from responsibilities. In Poland, the Polish constitution guarantees 3 freedoms that are relevant here. The first one is the freedom of research and publication of its results. The second is the freedom of teaching. And the third one is the autonomy of universities. These freedoms differ in the character. Academic freedom as an individual right and university autonomy as a collective right can sometimes collide. To have a meaningful resolution, we need to balance them, or in legal terms, to use proportionality measures. This means that none of the colliding rights can be exercised to the full extent. Each one must be partially reduced, but not more than absolutely necessary, and the reduction must not infringe on the essence of the considered freedom. The appropriateness of the balance has to be tested against the mission of the university and against the respect for academic values. Failure to do so would erode the trust in the institution, or the trust in the academic community, or the trust in individual persons, or all of them together. In Poland, the pivotal role in systemic guarding of university autonomy is fulfilled by Polish Rectors' Conference. This task was one of the main reasons for establishing such a conference in the 90s, soon after Poland switched to democratic system. And since then, it is always high on the conference agenda. Implementation of academic freedom and balancing it with broader institutional goals, including goals related to the public roles, are mainly in hands of the universities. Under universities, I mean both the university as an institution and university as a community. But in the background, there are other significant players: research funding agencies and studies accreditation agencies. The feeling of independence of researchers is very deeply rooted in university culture in Poland, and currently the balance is shifted very much towards the individual freedom. Also, individual institutional evaluation criteria and funding rules in our country mainly focus on performance indicators. This incentivizes individual achievements, while institutional development and good service to public roles enjoys little recognition. Generally, universities in Poland struggle when it comes to achieving large goals, significant to societal challenges. To support balancing the critical field of funding, universities test different ways of internal allocation of money. In addition to individual grants financed by grant agencies, internal funding is now often a mix of block funding, to be used for research or teaching goals at one's discretion, with internal grants awarded to achieve collective goals. A notable exception to the customary approach is the recent Polish Excellence Initiative in Research, whose first round finished 1.5 years ago. Universities could compete for significant extra funding beyond normal budgets. They have got much freedom in designing the goals, areas, and ways to achieve excellence, inducing reflection on the goals of collective character. These extra funds can be also spent very flexibly. It is expected that the initiative will change the perception of collective goals inside the academic communities, and that involved universities will serve as role models for others. Another interesting development is the participation of Polish university. Institutional cooperation opens up new possibilities for teachers and researchers, but require acceptance of agreement concluded by participated universities. This is very much a project in progress. Still, not only funding is that matters. There can be conflict on different grounds between individual and institutional interest, and at various levels: university, faculty, institute, or research groups. A recent survey showed that academic ombudsmen appointed in the growing number of Polish universities can be very helpful in working out the balance in practice in individual situations. There is also growing demand for clarification and codification of the rules to be used when collision of freedoms has to be resolved. In some universities, the codes of conduct are being discussed. Also, Polish Rectors' Conference has created an umbrella expert group to work on this topic. Having said all this, I want to emphasize that the societal context in which universities operate constantly change. New challenges appear all the time, and balancing of individual freedom with institutional goals must be adopted if it is going to be successful. Out of many challenges in Poland, I would like to mention here 4 of them. First one is the individualization of careers and their assessment, where individual successes are highly rewarded, while involvement in community-wide affairs and collective activities, even of fundamental importance, remains grossly undervalued. In extreme cases, it results in an approach to the university as an incubator for careers or a hotel for projects, with attitudes like, I will not waste time to engage in anything that does not measurably advance my career. This development weakens cohesion of academic communities and make them less caring for or more relaxed about academic values and safeguarding academic standards. The next challenge is strong polarization of the society, intentionally stoked by the politics, with extreme views dominating public debates and discussions. Consequently, ability to strike balances and use proportionality principle is less appreciated, or even seen as a proof of weakness. Inevitably, these attitudes gradually seep into universities as students and staff are engaged in the society at large. Also, the rising use of social media as a communication tool in academia comes with side effects already observed elsewhere. The desire to stand out among many users motivates to take extreme views rather than balanced ones. The fragmentation of communication inside the university and the appearance of internal information bubbles makes it difficult to have a broad agreement on academic values and their balancing. Finally, polarization also erodes trust in honest independence of institutions and open grounds for various complot theories and for searches of hidden agendas. The fallout of this is that we have a growing number of situations when autonomic academic procedures, for example, awarding or not of a doctorate, are declared by law as public administration procedures that can be disputed in administrative courts. This, in turn, focuses the attention of academic bodies not on the fair assessment of the content, but on procedural perfection. Coming to the summary of observations in Poland, good balancing of individual freedoms, institutional goals, and the public role of a university critically depends on the involvement of the academic community and the feeling of collective responsibility toward the society. Among the things that would help, I could mention a good and wise leadership at the level of the university, but also at the level of faculties, colleges, and institutes. Then the decrease of polarization. Then constant care for public trust, among others, by honest and open communication. Then communication of ethical values and academic standards inside the institution and including them in educational programs. Also, what is not straightforward in lifelong learning. And finally, reflection on career assessment. What does not help are attempts to externally regulate the balance between academic freedom and institutional goals, with the assumption that, for example, governmental or government-related bodies will do it better by definition. This short presentation necessarily covers only selected aspects of searching for the balance, but I'm sure that the discussion will bring also other topics to the floor. And I would like to thank you for your attention.
I would like to thank you too, Marcin. It might have been short and you might have had to have left a lot out, but what you have included is vital. You have mentioned the key concept of trust, which I'm sure will be appearing later on. And you have also focused on the need for universities to balance their various responsibilities and duties. And our next speaker is going to pick up that balance theme as well. Professor Astrid Söderberg-Widing is president of Stockholm University and is vice president designate of the Observatory's Governing Council. Astrid.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to speak today with Sweden as a case study. I've had the privilege to follow the work with developing the EUA vision, Universities Without Walls, as well as the new Magna Carta Universitatum Declaration, both extremely important and relevant documents which have been so eloquently presented today. So let us now dive into the Swedish context after the interesting presentation we have just heard from Poland. In December 2020, a new research bill was presented in Sweden. Behind the bill stood, of course, the two governing parties, the Social Democrats and the Green Party, but they had also joined forces with two other parties in the political middle. In spite of different priorities from the varying political perspectives, this new bill indeed means a great investment in research and innovation with broad political support, on which the Parliament will decide in April. This is, I would say, largely due to a pandemic's effect. Through this major challenge, the importance of research and higher education has become obvious for many and is thus much more in focus, not least for the attention of media and public opinion, after a number of years with significantly less priority on the political agenda. This research bill is interesting in many respects, and I would like to mention a few of them. First of all, it is clear that the authors of the bill have listened actively both to higher education institutions and to other important stakeholders. Compared to the EUA vision, many of the priorities are aligned, both when it comes to learning and teaching, not least with emphasis both on lifelong learning and on flexible, multi- and interdisciplinary paths. As concerns research with open science, ethics, and integrity as some of the focal points, and concerning innovation, not least with the focus on sustainability through cooperative models. Quite interestingly, explicit emphasis is put on free research, both bottom-up fundamental research funded by the Swedish Research Council and all kinds of free research funded by universities themselves through core block funding. This is quite unique from a Swedish perspective. In the last research bill from 2016, free research was not mentioned at all, as challenge-driven research and collaboration of all kinds stood in exclusive focus. However, it is now also stated that an increasing amount of core block funding to universities and university colleges will be allocated through a new funding model with profiling processes instead of relying on KPIs, a model that will be administered by the Swedish Research Council, thus once again risking to limit the free use of this so-called core funding, most likely driving it into the direction of clearly profiled challenges that have to be addressed by the universities. It is also mentioned that social engagement is to be considered as a major point in the evaluation of the upcoming applications for funding. Here, the increased emphasis on direct societal impact of the research is a potential threat to free researcher-driven fundamental research that still might contain totally unexpected potentials for application. The logic of research is obviously not always respected or understood in the political context. But then again, and this is the largest part of the bill, it also addresses 5 major societal challenges: climate and environment, health and welfare, digitization, competence and working life, and a democratic and strong society. Here, a number of research programs with funding from the state funding agencies are proposed, both extensions of already developed programs and new programs, small as well as large, some very specific, others more general in scope. When considering this in the light of the vision for universities without walls, many of the developments addressed are obviously the same: climate, sustainability, technological developments, democracy, misinformation, etc. In that respect, the Swedish universities also fundamentally share most of the priorities in the bill. However, there are different ways of comparing these two dimensions, the free research on one hand and the societal challenges on the other. One chapter in the bill is devoted to the section on free research. The 5 societal challenges have one chapter each, and in addition, there is a general introductory chapter on the challenges. Actual funding is another way of comparing, and here I will not go into numbers, but just say that the proportions are not unlike the unequal distribution of chapters between the two parts of the bill. I might add that universities has emphasized the importance of increased core block funding, but also of financing of bottom-up research-driven projects. When it comes to challenge-driven research, I would say, at least in Sweden, that this is something that engages us all as universities, and where we all see as a very high priority to contribute through research and higher education to solving the great societal challenges today. And I personally really appreciate in the update of the Magna Carta Universitatum document that the responsibility of universities is addressed alongside with principles and values. I should also add that many universities explicitly wish to avoid the dichotomy between fundamental and challenge-driven or applied research, which is sound per se, but there is still a problem, especially in the light of the challenges we are facing today. If there is too much emphasis on specific challenges, which may often be the case as politicians need to solve urgent societal problems and demonstrate that they do so in an efficient way by using universities in their function as state authorities, we will risk to undermine the broad knowledge basis from which unexpected future solutions to hitherto unknown societal challenges may be found. And future research may risk to be driven more out of looking for possible funding sources than out of scientific needs, which would indeed be fatal. Thirdly, specific emphasis in the research bill is put on academic freedom. A change in the Higher Education Act is proposed, where not only the researcher's right to freely choose and formulate scientific problems is emphasized, but also that academic freedom should be granted to individuals at universities, both when it comes to research and education. Here already, however, we as universities saw a problem, as academic freedom is primarily assigned to individuals or universities, whereas we see it as a societal responsibility as well to grant academic freedom and autonomy to universities and their researchers. But there is another but. In a statute comment to the proposed law, it is stated that, and I quote, "The free search for knowledge and the free dissemination of knowledge, however, shall always be conducted within the current legal framework and foundation of values." This has to be explained, as foundation of values is a term that only exists in Swedish. It was launched in 1990 to designate common values which are formulated to unite specific groups in society, for example, schools or health and social care. There is also a general so-called state foundation of values, which all state authorities in Sweden have to follow, with 6 principles: democracy, legality, objectivity, free opinion forming, respect, efficiency, and service. And as I mentioned, universities in Sweden, with very few exceptions, are state authorities, so we are already bound to follow these principles, and they may, of course, be changed in a changing political landscape. But hitherto, it had been assumed that this is related specifically to the management of universities. Now, by subordinating the free search for knowledge, which knows of no national boundaries, to this state regulation, academic freedom may, ironically enough, actually be threatened by the very same move which was supposed to defend it. I do hope that my Swedish example may have served to illustrate some more general issues and problems which I believe we all share, not least within Europe. To try to conclude, while Sweden as a research nation, both from the point of view of the government and through its universities, clearly recognizes the value both of academic freedom and of research addressing societal challenges as well as fundamental research, a significant number of tensions and conflicting interests within the field may still be discerned. These primarily concern the role of the state in relation to the universities as such, and not least its potential steering role towards research and education conducted there. For us as Swedish universities, we strongly advocate the balancing between fundamental and challenge-driven research, and thus also between the more curiosity-driven projects and the ones with more specific focus on deliverables. We believe that both are equally important for a knowledge-based society, which through free research, analysis, synthesis, and communication at the universities and in collaboration, may uphold the fundamental values of universities, but also take informed decisions for the future on a solid research basis about critical societal issues for Europe and for the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Astrid. And thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you to all of you who have been listening and posting questions. Now, as might be expected from such a fundamental and well-produced report, the questions have gone off in a number of directions. But I'd like to start with one which touches on something which Seibold said, but which I think is applicable to most of us who are here today. And that is, what is the best way of raising awareness of and strengthening fundamental values at the institutional level? What constituencies need to be particularly targeted and involved? Now, I wonder if one of our two later speakers, Marcin or Astrid, would like to start with that question. Marcin.
Well, I think that the important groups for passing the knowledge and raising awareness of values are students and PhD students, because their involvement in discussing and in the practical use of academic values is absolutely crucial for the further dissemination them in the society. So I think that, and I have included such a suggestion in my talk, that we should include the academic values in the curricula, at least some discussion and some ways to get this knowledge and make this knowledge own to the students and PhD students. That would be something I would strongly advocate. Thank you.
Do you wish to comment, Astrid?
No, not for the moment. Thank you.
And Michael and Seibold, do you wish to comment on that question?
Well, I mean, to me, this is absolutely something that we as universities have to relearn. If we look back a couple of decades to the 70s, when in many universities in Western Europe, discussions on what the university is for, why a university, and which values a university should be governed by, were the order of the day. There were debates with students and teachers all along, and it resulted in a university that very much was aware of its position in society and its ideal that it was defending. We have seen a development over the decades to a university, as Marcin very aptly described it, more as a platform for individual careers. And if individual careers and individual projects are the real structure of the university, we are never getting that community sense that we need. If a university wants to be an example of good citizenship and responsible academic work in the interest of society, it must itself be organized, be structured, and behaving as a responsible community. And you cannot do that without values, including the values that students and young researchers, PhD students, are discovering and developing in their junior years.
Thank you.
If I might comment, David, briefly. I would pick up particularly on Seibol's use of the term community, because we have evolved our thinking to appreciate that universities are communities of learning. Marcin is right in living them. The students, the postdocs, and so on, operationalize them in a way. But in the formation of the culture of the university, it must be a whole community engagement, as there's total interdependence. And again, I would include the entire community, administration and external governors, because you need the strength and the power of the largest number possible of ambassadors for our philosophy, our culture, our values to society as a whole. So they should be developed holistically as a community and then promoted across society by the entire community.
If I could build on that answer, of course, there's the external community, there's the internal community, the largest number of people in which are students. And I wonder what your views are about how students should be involved in the development and the living of universities' values, and perhaps which values you feel we should help students to understand so that they can take them out into the world. Would one of you, Astrid?
On that, I think that it's extremely important to involve the students and to develop the culture of values together with the students. And in a way, paradoxically, my experience from this past year with the pandemics has in a way facilitated the talk about values. Students engage much more on a meta level, so to speak, because our universities risk to become not only researcher hotels, but also student hotels where they come and they get their education and then they leave again. But there has a sense of community and of common concerns has really developed under this past year. And so we have much better dialogue, I would say, with our student bodies within the university, because we see that we have these challenges in common and we have to face them, and we have to bring about not only get the education going, but to create the university culture together. So I think that has been very important. And also I think responsibility, of course, is one of these values, but we should also try to transmit the importance of critical thinking, of course, and academic freedom.
Other speakers?
Just going back, I suppose, to a point I made earlier in relation to this question, David, we do have to take on board more effectively the reality that learning is changing. Students went to university when I was young to gain knowledge. That's now on their phones. They're now coming to university to learn how to use knowledge, apply knowledge, interpret knowledge. And that has changed the relationship between the student and the academic staff fundamentally, because in the end, we've all now become partners in learning. Learning is a co-creation of knowledge. And that's why I have the sense that, everybody must be involved at an equal level, and taking on board the reality that a much larger proportion of society are becoming our students. Lifelong learning means that an enormous proportion of the citizenry in the future will be our learners, our co-learners. And that's why I think we've got to rethink the traditional boundaries of roles and responsibilities in addressing this challenge.
Martin?
Well, I just would like to add to what has been said so far, that we should also try to include some exercises on balancing different rights, because it is the problem of our societies now, which become very polarized, that some values start to be picked a la carte. It is nice to have this value as an argument for my point or my position, or pick another one. And in real life, they have to be balanced, and they should serve the higher goals, and some kind of disproportionality is needed. And it is not easy to learn this. This could be learned and taught particularly when the students and those who are going to exercise this are giving some leading roles, and there's lifelong learning. And I think it is one of the fields that also is very important to have this balancing of rights and freedoms. But we have also for example, very young receivers of big grants that allow to employ other people. And this is also a field in which the grant leaders should be able to recognize that the people they hire for the work in the grant are not just the experts to do the narrowly defined job, but also those who will have to enjoy some academic freedom in the future. So preparing for this type of jobs is also the way of teaching the values.
Seibold?
Yeah, in line with this, I would like to add that when you talk about societal values, the appetite for debate rather than for silencing and cancelling, we are talking about an element of any student's education. We are supposed as a university not only support students to educate themselves to become engineers or teachers of history in a lab context. We are preparing them to be engineers and history teachers in real life society. And as a professional, they will be facing these challenges in their schools and in their work organizations. So it is not just a nice extra to talk about values in education. It is essential if we want to support our students in the right way and prepare them for their societal careers.
Thank you very much. This next question is worthy of a 3-hour period in which you can write an essay, and you will probably then still only scratch the surface of it, but it's a fundamental and it's an important question. There is inevitably, as leaders of universities, the need to balance different priorities. And a questioner has asked, can you give a concrete example of how you, as university leaders, have to balance academic freedom and institutional autonomy with your strategic decisions and the operational requirements of your institutions? Did you encounter contradictions? Should institutional leaders be allowed to restrict rights, such as individual academic freedom, in certain cases when collaborating, for example, with non-democratic countries? What are your thoughts on this, and have you any concrete examples which you can share?
Filling the silence. I have, these are personal questions in the sense, are they not? They're directed to us. They must give instances. Yes, I have had a challenging experience in going a long way as an institution to developing a branch campus in a large country that has a very different value system from that exhibited by the home institution. Much effort was invested, but when and much was invested by the management, senior management of the university and some academics. But the final decision on whether to proceed revolved around, to a large degree, whether the project would require us to compromise excessively on our values, facing such issues as a requirement by the host country to include substantial tracts of governing party philosophy within the curriculum to be delivered by our university in that territory. And we faced the choices of embracing revenue that would be attractive on the one hand, that would sustain a very pressed home institution, versus the consequences of compromising on our principles and academic value, which ultimately had put at risk the reputation of the institution. In the end, we made the choice that our values and our reputation as a value-based institution were more important than the fiscal gains from that relationship. And we did not proceed, notwithstanding the scale of effort that had already been invested. That's a personal one. But universities' reputations are built up over decades and centuries and have the potential to be lost in one day if the institution fails to live its values.
Astrid.
Yes, I would like to give not such a personal example, but to address the question from, again, a Swedish perspective. Last fall, all Swedish rectors were called to the Swedish Security Service, and we were warned against certain countries which are difficult and which do not share our values as a society. Then we got some very concrete advice how to proceed in dealing with these countries, to restrict contacts to the maximum, etc., etc. And this is, I'm sure, very wise from the perspective of the Swedish Security Service, but in a way it's completely the opposite of the culture that we try to develop at our universities with open exchange and of course with other researchers on common problems and research questions that we want to develop together. So in a way there was this complete clash of perspectives which we have to struggle with now for the future.
Seibold?
What I have always found one of the most difficult issues is when groups of students or groups of professors asked the leadership of the university to draw a line, to end a relationship, to boycott exchanges, and to really exclude some either national or international partners from working with us. I have myself always been defending a position where tolerance is the art of accepting what you do not accept. And culture and universities are not politics and not business. We are in the business of open lines and open communications. A friend of mine from St. Petersburg in Russia repeats all the time, when political roads are blocked, when the possibility of normal political relationships between countries are very difficult, it is my hope that culture and universities will be the remaining bridges, and boycott should be only used in the very, very, very last instance. So my personal preference in that dilemma has always been to keep bridges open and to stay in touch rather than draw lines and boycott, however good the issue for a boycott might be.
Marcin?
Well, prohibiting something is always a difficult task, and it has to come after a good reflection. But I can imagine that there are situations in which the university leadership has to limit some freedoms. And it would be the case when the freedom is used perversely against the essence of other freedoms or the essence of this particular freedom. Freedom of expressing scientific view is the absolutely important one, but it could not be used to quench or to mute the other people and other members of the community from expressing their scientific view of their scientific findings. So in such a case, it is really necessary to have a deep insight in the situation and make a wise decision. And the best is to discuss these decisions with larger groups that could represent different constituencies of the university community. Having this internal discussion is also something that raises awareness of the limitations and special situations with the exercising of freedoms and rights.
Thank you. There have been one or two questions about quality assurance and the interface with academic freedom. One of these refers specifically to the European standards and guidelines in assessing academic freedom. as I said earlier on, we have participants from over 70 countries participating today, and in different countries outside Europe, there are different arrangements for quality assurance and so on. The question is, do the panelists see other possibilities for assessment and quality assurance? And how might attention be paid to academic values in those systems? Any thoughts on that?
Two remarks on my part. First of all, we have recently seen the launching of the so-called Academic Freedom Index, which is a project where at the moment some 2,000 experts, observers worldwide observe the situation and developments in terms of academic freedom in different countries and different institutions worldwide. And these results are being collected and produced and updated every year. The European University Association has done a great job in University Autonomy Index already for many, many years. It's those independent lines of indexing and observing that are very helpful in keeping a close watch on developments worldwide. In addition, it is always striking me as utterly strange that of all the rankings of universities we have, none of them is taking values any seriously. I mean, I am very critical on rankings overall, but this is a specific point where I think that rankings are really not doing a good job and not really providing a service to the sector. It should be quite normal that integrity and honesty, but also openness and access are among the absolutely evident characteristics of a good university. And if you do not take that seriously, you're guilty.
Do any of our other speakers wish to comment?
I could just a short comment. I think that while we must, of course, be accountable and willing to do a quality assurance job, there is at a certain level, there is a kind of obsessive need to evaluate universities, at least in some countries that I know of. And there it risks to become counterproductive. But I think that, and this is my experience from being one of the pilots in the Living Values project, that the work on values actually adds also to the development of quality in both research and education, working with the fundamental values of the university and trying to develop them is a way also of foster a quality culture. It is not a way that is easily measured, but still is very, it still gives clear results, I would say. So in a way, I think the work with values can really enhance the quality of our universities.
One of the frustrations of webinars is the very limited time envelope. And I'm reading some fascinating questions which have actually given me ideas for future webinars in this series. And I'm going to try and put two of them together to invite a last contribution from our panelists on one or other. The first area of questioning was around challenge. And the question was, when your university is set up within, for instance, the context of the Catholic Church, how right is it, how possible is it to challenge that when in fact it is the values and so on of the Catholic Church that are the strength of that sector? The second question, which is also related to challenge, is that there have been a number of comments about free speech and identity politics, and their implications regarding academic freedom and the internal threat that we may be creating, where social pressures within the academy may be challenging academic freedom. Can I invite our panelists to make a last brief contribution on one or other of those 2 points before I close? Michael.
If I might just make 2 brief responses to each. The first is that staff, academic staff, researchers, and students make choices with regard to the institutions in which they wish to work or study. We will see that, in fact, that choice growing with the explosion of virtual education into the future. So I'm not sure that this is a question of what somebody should do within a Catholic institution where they see conflict between their views and the ethos of the institution. There is the choice to be there or not. And on the second, I have a very simple response to that. That goes back to the 1948 Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And I see the freedom to discuss these matters on campus. It's a healthy thing that there should be such discussion, but it should be in such conducted in such a fashion that nobody's individual security is put at risk, and broadly defining security.
Thank you.
Well, I would like to echo this last statement of Michael's. A university should be a safe place for not just people with the same opinions, but for people with different opinions. And students and teachers should learn the art of dealing with differences, as we all in our societies are to learn to live with differences. And the attitudes of those who want to silence and refuse a platform to those of a different opinion, in my book, should not be in a university. The open mind, the appetite for inquiry that is typical for the university, the curiosity that we want to establish and develop in our students and young researchers, they all require that atmosphere of openness, of safe spaces, and not of monopoly.
Thank you. Astrid, do you have a last word?
Just to echo what was just said, I strongly believe that one of our main tasks as universities is to provide open arenas for free speech and for critical thinking, with respect for the other and for the differences of opinion that we might have.
Thank you. And Martin?
Well, I think that in both areas, the important thing is that university does not exist without critical thinking and open debate. And every institution that is put, whatever the way, in the situation that it cannot exercise critical thinking and open debate, loses the chance to be a real university. So as long as the critical thinking is possible, as long as the debates serve the widening of the horizons and widening of the views on the matters, and not as the tools to narrow the view, everything can go well. If we lose this critical thinking and this academic type of widening debate, then we are going in the wrong direction.
Well, thank you all very much indeed. Thank you for the level of engagement that we have had in this webinar through the many questions and comments that have been put. Also, I think the kindness with which the comments have been put, it shows that although we are spread over many countries and there are rather a lot of us, there is still a nice sense of community and a purposeful sense of community in higher education. I would like to thank specifically our four speakers. I would like to thank Amanda Crowfoot, Secretary General of EUA, who has been working behind the scenes and helping me in particular with marshalling the very rich questions that we've had. And also behind the scenes, Carla Pazzagelia, the administrator of the observatory, who has been seamlessly managing all the technicalities. I would like to thank the supporters of the Magna Carta for their generosity, which in a time when there has been a lot of financial stress on universities has been most welcome and has enabled us to mount events like today. If you are here from an institution which has not yet signed the Magna Carta Universitatem and you would like to do so, there are details of how to do so in the joining instructions which you were sent yesterday. The recording will be available and can be accessed from the EUA and the Magna Carta websites from tomorrow or probably the day after. The next event in this series will be on the 19th of April. That will be on the theme of involving students effectively, and we will be partnering with the Global Student Forum for that event. And after that, on the 16th and 17th of June, we will be conducting a virtual launch of the Magna Carta Universitatem 2020. If you could complete the feedback questionnaire that we circulated to us, that would help us. We always try to improve the way that we do things, and your frank comments and helpful comments on what we have done will help us to do that. Just finally to say again, thank you for joining this event, and may I wish you every success in taking forward Vision 2030 in accordance with the values set out in the MCU 2020. Thank you very much and good day.